Sometimes the smallest warning is the one the whole world chooses to ignore. Dawn spread slowly across the Atlantic, brushing the horizon with pale ribbons of silver and gold as the passenger ferry Liberty Star cut through calm water on her routine voyage from Portland, Maine, toward Nova Scotia. A cool breeze carried the scent of salt, diesel fuel, and fresh coffee drifting from the upper deck cafe where travelers gathered beneath blankets, watching gulls glide effortlessly beside the ship. Families laughed softly over paper cups, retirees admired the endless blue horizon, and business travelers stared into glowing phone screens, grateful for one last stretch of quiet before reaching land. Everything about the morning felt ordinary, almost comforting, the kind of peaceful beginning that convinced people nothing unexpected could possibly happen. Officer Nathan Hayes stood near the main boarding corridor with one hand resting lightly on the sturdy leather leash beside him. At 37, Nathan carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who no longer needed to prove anything. His short brown hair was neatly trimmed, faint threads of gray beginning to appear near his temples. His weathered face reflected years spent first as a United States Marine and later as a K-9 officer, while his steady blue eyes rarely lingered anywhere for long without noticing details others overlooked. Beside him stood Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a rich sable coat that shimmered beneath the morning light. His ears remained upright, his amber eyes quietly studying every movement around him. Passengers often smiled when they saw him, mistaking his composed posture for friendliness, but Nathan understood something different. Rex was always working. Even while standing perfectly still, he cataloged scents, footsteps, voices, and invisible changes carried by the wind. During 6 years together, Nathan had trusted that nose more times than he could count, and it had never betrayed him. Boarding continued smoothly as crew members welcomed late arrivals with practiced smiles. Suitcases rolled across polished steel ramps, children tugged stuffed animals behind them, and announcements echoed gently through overhead speakers reminding everyone to secure personal belongings before departure. Nathan nodded politely to familiar crew members while Rex remained unusually quiet, almost too quiet. The dog's nose lifted slightly into the breeze before lowering again toward the stream of passing luggage. Then it happened. Rex froze so suddenly the leather leash became perfectly still. Every muscle beneath his thick coat tightened. His ears leaned forward. His breathing slowed. Nathan felt the subtle change immediately without even looking down. He had learned long ago that silence from Rex often spoke louder than barking. The next passenger stepped aboard carrying a dark navy suitcase that appeared no different from dozens already loaded onto the vessel. The owner was a neatly dressed white man in his early 40s wearing a light gray jacket and polished brown shoes. His expression remained relaxed as he smiled politely at a nearby attendant before setting the suitcase briefly beside his feet while adjusting his boarding pass. At that exact moment, Rex surged forward one deliberate step and released a sharp bark that echoed across the boarding deck. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. A child dropped his cookie. The man looked down, surprised but composed, while Nathan tightened his grip on the leash without pulling the dog back. Rex barked again, then again, not wildly, not fearfully. Each bark carried the same unwavering certainty, directed at only one object. The Navy suitcase resting quietly on the deck. Nathan stared at Rex, then at the luggage, and a familiar thought settled heavily into his mind. In 6 years together, his partner had never asked him to ignore a warning. The barking lingered over the boarding deck long after Rex fell silent, leaving behind an uneasy stillness that spread more quickly than the ocean breeze. Crew members exchanged uncertain glances while several passengers paused with their rolling suitcases, waiting for someone else to explain what they had just witnessed. Nathan stepped forward with measured confidence, never taking his eyes off the German shepherd. Rex had shifted back into complete silence, but his body remained rigid, his gaze fixed on the Navy suitcase as though everything else around him had disappeared. The man beside it offered an awkward smile that seemed carefully practiced rather than naturally given. He raised both hands slightly, more confused than offended. "Officer, is something wrong?" he asked in a calm, even voice. Nathan studied him for a moment before answering. The passenger appeared to be in his early 40s, clean-shaven, with neatly combed light brown hair and clear blue eyes that never wandered from Nathan's face. His clothes were expensive without being flashy, the kind worn by professionals who traveled often and packed light. A silver wedding band rested on his left hand, and a simple leather watch showed signs of regular use. Nothing about him immediately suggested trouble. If anything, he looked like the sort of man who apologized when someone else bumped into him. "I am Nathan Hayes with the canine unit," Nathan said politely. "My partner has shown unusual interest in your luggage. I would appreciate your cooperation while we take a closer look." The man nodded almost instantly. "Of course. My name is Andrew Collins. I understand you have a job to do." There was no hesitation, no irritation, no attempt to argue. If anything, Andrew seemed almost eager to help. That alone made several nearby passengers relax. A woman standing behind him whispered to her husband that the officer was probably just being careful. Another traveler quietly remarked that the dog must have picked up food inside the suitcase. The explanations came easily because ordinary people preferred ordinary answers. Nathan knelt beside Rex and gently rested one hand against the dog's shoulder. "Easy, buddy," he whispered. Rex never looked away from the luggage. Nathan had seen this expression before. It was not excitement. It was conviction. Within moments, the ship's security supervisor arrived carrying a portable inspection table. The suitcase was carefully placed on top, while Andrew unlocked it without complaint. Metal clasps clicked softly in the morning air. The lid opened. Folded shirts. A navy blazer sealed inside a garment bag. A laptop. Charging cables. Toiletries packed with remarkable precision. A hardcover novel. Everything appeared exactly as one would expect from someone taking a short business trip. Security officers examined each item carefully while Nathan watched Rex from the corner of his eye. The German Shepherd remained motionless, breathing slowly, waiting. After several minutes, the supervisor looked toward Nathan with an apologetic expression. "Everything appears perfectly normal, Officer Hayes." Andrew smiled politely, though a hint of embarrassment colored his face. "I suppose your partner smelled my lunch," he joked gently before lifting a neatly wrapped turkey sandwich from an insulated container. A few nearby passengers laughed quietly, grateful for the tension breaking at last. Nathan forced a faint smile, but something inside him refused to settle. Rex did not care about sandwiches. He had ignored hundreds of them throughout his career. As Andrew carefully repacked the suitcase, Rex suddenly turned away from it. His nose lifted into the cool ocean air before swinging slowly toward the interior corridor leading below the passenger decks. The dog took one cautious step in that direction, then another. Without barking once, he began following a scent that no one else on the Liberty Star even knew existed. Rex moved with quiet determination through the main passenger corridor, his pace steady, his nose drifting inches above the polished floor before lifting again into the cool, circulating air. Nathan followed without a word, offering only a brief nod to the security supervisor before disappearing deeper into the ship. Behind them, normal life slowly resumed. Children laughed near the observation windows. Waiters arranged breakfast trays inside the dining lounge, and soft instrumental music drifted through hidden speakers. Yet Nathan felt an invisible thread pulling him farther from the comfort of routine. During his years as a Marine, he had learned that danger rarely announced itself with noise. More often, it hid behind ordinary moments, waiting patiently for someone to notice what did not belong. Rex suddenly paused beside a narrow service intersection where passengers were not permitted without authorization. A heavy steel door stood half open as crew members pushed carts loaded with fresh linens toward the lower accommodation decks. The scent of detergent mixed with warm engine oil and salty ocean air, creating an overwhelming blend that would have confused most working dogs. Rex seemed completely unaffected. His ears tilted forward, and he quietly stepped past the doorway before stopping again. Nathan glanced toward a young crewman organizing supply crates nearby. "Morning," Nathan said pleasantly. "Has anything unusual happened below deck since boarding?" The young man blinked in surprise before shaking his head. "Nothing at all, sir. Everything has been running on schedule. We finished loading supplies before sunrise, and engineering reported all systems normal." Nathan thanked him and continued walking. Rex resumed moving, but now his path no longer followed the direction Andrew Collins had taken after collecting his suitcase. Instead, the German Shepherd crossed the corridor toward a stairwell leading downward. Two maintenance workers climbed past carrying tool bags, smiling politely at the dog as they continued toward the upper levels. Rex ignored them completely. His attention remained fixed somewhere below. The farther they descended, the quieter the ship became. The cheerful sounds of passengers gradually faded into the low mechanical heartbeat of the ferry itself. Powerful engines hummed through layers of steel, while ventilation fans whispered steadily behind insulated walls. The air felt cooler here, touched with the scent of metal, seawater, and electrical equipment. Nathan noticed Rex breathing more deeply now, sampling every current of air as though assembling an invisible map that only he could understand. They reached a corridor lined with storage compartments, maintenance rooms, and emergency equipment lockers. Everything appeared perfectly organized. Bright white lights reflected off freshly painted bulkheads. Safety signs hung exactly where they should. Nothing looked disturbed. Yet Rex slowed until every careful step seemed deliberate. He approached one closed utility door, sniffed the lower edge for only a second, then quietly continued past it without hesitation. Nathan recognized the behavior immediately. Rex was eliminating possibilities rather than making accusations. Whatever scent he had detected was moving, weaving through the ship instead of remaining in one place. Suddenly, the dog stopped beside a large ventilation grate mounted chest high along the corridor wall. He raised his head toward the cool stream of circulating air flowing through the metal slats. His entire posture changed. His tail became perfectly still. His amber eyes focused on the dark opening as though listening to something beyond human hearing. Nathan stepped closer and inhaled. He smelled only machinery, salt, and the faint odor of fresh paint. Rex remained frozen for several long seconds before quietly turning away from the vent and leading Nathan toward another stairwell, descending even deeper into the vessel. Nathan tightened his grip gently on the leash, his instincts now matching the silent certainty in his partner's eyes. Whatever had first drawn Rex to that ordinary Navy suitcase had never been inside the luggage at all. It had merely carried the scent of something, or someone, hidden somewhere else aboard the Liberty Star. The farther they descended, the more the ferry seemed to transform into a different world. The bright chatter from the passenger decks had vanished completely, replaced by the steady rhythm of engines turning beneath thousands of tons of steel. Every few seconds the deck vibrated ever so slightly under Nathan's boots, a quiet reminder that the Liberty Star continued pressing through open water while hundreds of people above remained completely unaware that anything unusual was unfolding below. Rex slowed as they entered a narrow maintenance passage lined with insulated pipes stretching across the ceiling like silver branches. Warm air drifted from one side of the corridor while a cooler current slipped through the ventilation ducts overhead. The German shepherd lifted his nose, sampling each invisible stream with patient precision. Nathan watched carefully without interrupting him. He had learned years ago that a working dog never hurried when the trail became more complicated. Speed belonged to certainty. Care belonged to truth. A voice echoed from around the corner before a maintenance technician appeared carrying a flashlight and a clipboard. He smiled politely when he recognized the police officer. "Everything all right down here?" he asked. Nathan returned the smile. "Probably just following up on something my partner noticed." The technician glanced at Rex. "Smart dog." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "There was a delivery crew down here before departure moving replacement air filters into storage. Other than that, nobody unusual." Nathan thanked him and mentally filed away the information. Air filters, ventilation, air movement. Those words settled somewhere deep inside his thoughts. Rex continued forward until they reached a junction where three corridors met. Without warning, he stopped again. His head slowly turned left, then right, then back toward the ceiling. Nathan noticed something he had not seen before. Rex was no longer tracking a scent along the floor. He was following something carried through the airflow itself. The realization tightened his attention immediately. Whatever odor had first reached the Navy suitcase had not remained with it. The suitcase had simply traveled through the same air as whatever Rex was searching for. Nathan looked upward toward the large ventilation ducts stretching the length of the corridor. Fresh air circulated continuously throughout the ferry, connecting passenger cabins, service rooms, storage compartments, and lower engineering spaces into one enormous breathing system. If a unique scent entered that network, It could drift far from its original source before slowly fading away. Suddenly, the earlier inspection made perfect sense. Andrew Collins's luggage had been cleaned because the suitcase itself had never been the destination. It had briefly become a carrier. Rex quietly approached another ventilation grate mounted low against the wall. This time he did not bark. Instead, he pressed his nose close to the metal openings before stepping back, repeating the motion twice with careful concentration. His ears remained perfectly still. Nathan crouched beside him and gently ran one hand along the dog's neck. "You are trying to tell me it came through here," he whispered. Rex looked directly into Nathan's eyes for only a heartbeat before turning toward another service corridor branching deeper into restricted areas of the vessel. It was the closest thing to an answer Nathan had ever received without words. He removed the small radio clipped to his vest and contacted the ship's security office. "This is Officer Hayes. I would like maintenance blueprints for the ventilation system and lower service decks. I am not requesting an emergency response at this time. I simply need to verify something." A brief silence followed before the dispatcher acknowledged his request. Nathan clipped the radio back onto his vest as Rex resumed walking with renewed purpose. Ahead, another steel door stood slightly open, allowing a gentle current of cool air to drift into the corridor. Mixed within the familiar sense of machinery and seawater was something impossibly faint, something Nathan himself could not identify. Rex recognized it instantly. His pace quickened for the first time that morning, and Nathan followed without hesitation, realizing they were no longer chasing a suspicious suitcase. They were following a trail that someone had unknowingly carried through the ship, one invisible breath at a time. The steel door opened into a service passage that felt forgotten by everyone except the crew responsible for keeping the ferry alive beneath the surface of ordinary travel. The lighting was softer here, casting long reflections across smooth metal walls while insulated pipes disappeared into the distance above Nathan's head. The constant vibration of the engines seemed stronger now, steady enough to blur the line between sound and sensation. Rex moved with greater confidence than before, no longer pausing at every intersection. Whatever invisible trail he had been assembling was becoming clearer with every step. Nathan remained close behind, allowing the German shepherd to choose each turn without interference. A few moments later, his radio crackled softly. "Officer Hayes, security has located the ventilation schematics. There is a maintenance junction approximately 75 yards ahead of your current position. It connects the lower storage level, engineering access, and several utility compartments. Would you like additional personnel sent down?" Nathan glanced at Rex before answering. "Not yet. Keep the information ready. I want to understand what my partner is following before we involve passengers or interrupt operations." "Copy that," the dispatcher replied. Silence returned, broken only by the quiet hum of machinery and the distant rush of seawater against the hull. As they approached the maintenance junction, Rex suddenly slowed again. His ears lifted. His breathing became almost imperceptible. Nathan noticed the dog listening rather than smelling for the first time that morning. They rounded the final corner and entered a wider compartment where several ventilation trunks merged into one large central shaft stretching vertically through the ship. Electrical panels lined one wall, while stacks of replacement filters sat neatly arranged on wooden pallets nearby. Everything appeared clean, organized, and undisturbed. Yet Rex refused to move farther. He stared toward the far side of the room, where another narrow corridor disappeared behind a row of storage lockers. Nathan followed his gaze. At first he heard nothing beyond the familiar pulse of the engines. Then, just as he began to question himself, another sound reached him. It was so faint that he almost dismissed it as part of the machinery. A soft metallic tap. Then silence. Several seconds passed before it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Not rhythmic enough to belong to an engine. Not loud enough to identify with certainty. Nathan slowly raised one hand, signaling Rex to remain still. Both of them listened together. The ferry continued moving steadily through open water, while somewhere beyond the storage corridor, another gentle tapping echoed through layers of steel. It stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Nathan waited nearly half a minute before taking another cautious step forward. Rex followed immediately, his tail held perfectly level. They entered the narrow passage where the air felt noticeably cooler. The scent of paint and machine oil faded, replaced by the clean metallic smell of recently serviced compartments. Along the right side stood several locked storage rooms marked for maintenance equipment. On the left, a plain gray hatch bore only a small identification number that matched nothing Nathan had noticed on the public deck plans. He knelt beside the hatch, examining the frame. No scratches, no signs of forced entry. Everything looked exactly as it should. Rex approached quietly and lowered his nose to the narrow gap beneath the door. He inhaled once, twice. Then he lifted his head and looked directly at Nathan. There was no barking this time, no growling. Only absolute certainty reflected in those amber eyes. Nathan reached out and rested his hand gently against the cool steel surface. It felt ordinary, silent, empty. Then, barely audible through the thick insulation, another delicate sound drifted from somewhere beyond the hatch. It was not mechanical. It was not part of the ship. It sounded like someone knocking very softly, as though hoping to be heard without frightening anyone at all. Nathan's heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. After years in uniform, he had learned that the quietest discoveries often demanded the greatest patience. He stepped back, pressed the radio button on his vest, and spoke in an even voice. "Security, this is Officer Hayes. I have located an area that requires immediate verification. Please send the chief engineer to the lower maintenance junction. Bring the master access keys. And ask everyone to remain calm. We may finally be standing in front of what Rex has been trying to show us all morning." The chief engineer arrived less than 3 minutes later, carrying a heavy ring of brass keys that chimed softly with every hurried step. Behind him came 2 members of the ship's security team, their expressions serious but controlled. Nathan appreciated that no alarms had been sounded. Above them, hundreds of passengers were still enjoying breakfast, unaware that a quiet investigation was unfolding beneath their feet. Panic served no one unless danger had already been confirmed. The engineer adjusted his glasses and examined the gray hatch with visible confusion. "This compartment should only contain ventilation controls," he said. "It is inspected every month. Nobody is assigned to stay inside." Nathan stepped aside while Rex remained seated directly in front of the door, never breaking his silent watch. The engineer selected a key, inserted it into the lock, and turned it slowly. A dull metallic click echoed through the narrow passage. Everyone instinctively held their breath. As the hatch swung inward, cool air drifted into the corridor carrying the familiar scent of machinery along with something else that Nathan could not immediately identify. The room beyond was small and brightly illuminated. Electrical cabinets lined one wall, while large ventilation equipment occupied most of the floor space. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared disturbed. Security officers exchanged puzzled glances. One of them quietly muttered, "It is empty." Nathan did not answer. Rex had already stepped across the threshold. The German shepherd ignored every piece of machinery and walked directly toward the far corner where several large replacement air filters stood stacked against the wall awaiting installation. He sniffed the nearest pallet only briefly before circling behind it. Then he stopped. His ears lifted. His tail became perfectly still. Nathan followed him around the stack and immediately noticed something that should not have been there. A narrow maintenance panel had been pulled slightly away from the wall, leaving only a gap of a few inches. It was subtle enough that almost anyone would have walked past without noticing. The engineer frowned. "That panel should be bolted shut," he whispered. Together, they carefully slid the filters aside, revealing the hidden opening more clearly. It was not a doorway, but an access panel leading into a service crawl space built around the central ventilation shaft. The engineer shined his flashlight inside. Dust floated gently through the beam while metal supports disappeared into darkness. Then everyone heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The same quiet sound Nathan had heard through the hatch only minutes earlier. This time it came from somewhere inside the narrow passage beyond the panel. One of the security officers leaned forward and called gently, "Hello? Is anyone in there?" For several long seconds, there was only silence. Then a soft voice answered, barely louder than a whisper. "Please, is someone there?" Nathan felt every person in the room become perfectly still. There was no fear in the voice, only exhaustion and cautious hope. The engineer immediately knelt beside the opening. "Stay where you are," he called kindly. "We are going to help you." Rex let out one quiet whine, the first sound he had made since sitting before the hidden panel. It was not an alarm. It sounded almost like relief. The engineer explained that the crawlspace connected several maintenance routes used during construction decades earlier, many of which no longer appeared on standard deck plans. With flashlights illuminating the narrow passage, Nathan carefully entered first, Rex staying close behind. The steel walls reflected every movement, while the distant hum of the ventilation system surrounded them like steady breathing. After moving only 20 feet through the confined passage, the flashlight beam revealed a figure sitting calmly against the wall wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. The person looked tired but alert, shielding tired eyes from the bright light. Nathan immediately lowered his voice. "You are safe now." The stranger blinked slowly before offering the faintest smile. Behind Nathan, Rex stood quietly with his ears forward, watching not with suspicion anymore, but with the peaceful certainty of a partner who had finally led everyone to the place they had needed to find all along. The narrow crawl space felt strangely peaceful despite its hidden location deep inside the ferry. Warm air drifted steadily through the ventilation channels, carrying the constant hum of machinery that now sounded less like noise and more like a quiet heartbeat surrounding everyone inside the steel passage. Nathan knelt a respectful distance from the exhausted stranger while Rex remained seated beside him, his amber eyes calm, his breathing slow, every ounce of tension that had guided him through the morning gradually fading away. The person wrapped in the silver emergency blanket appeared to be a white woman in her early 30s. Her blonde hair was loosely tied back, though several strands had escaped and rested across her tired face. She looked pale and weary rather than injured, and her blue eyes reflected equal measures of relief and disbelief as she looked first at Nathan, then at the German shepherd who had found her. "My name is Emily Parker," she whispered, her voice rough from hours of breathing dry recycled air. "I thought nobody would ever hear me." Nathan offered a reassuring smile that carried the quiet confidence earned through years of difficult situations. "You are safe now, Emily. We are going to get you somewhere comfortable, and we will figure everything else out together." Emily nodded slowly before glancing toward Rex. Tears quietly gathered in her eyes. "He found me," she murmured almost to herself. "He never gave up." Nathan looked down at his partner and gently rubbed the thick fur behind one alert ear. Rex responded by leaning ever so slightly against Nathan's leg before returning his attention to Emily, his expression almost impossibly gentle. The chief engineer carefully examined the cramped compartment surrounding them. Flashlight beams revealed old maintenance markings dating back decades, evidence that the narrow passage had once been used regularly during construction and inspections before newer access routes replaced it. "These passages were sealed from normal operations years ago," he explained softly. "Most crew members do not even know they still exist." Nathan slowly helped Emily to her feet. She moved carefully but remained steady, accepting a bottle of water from one of the security officers waiting near the entrance. After taking several grateful sips, she explained that she had accidentally entered the maintenance area while searching for a restroom shortly after boarding. One unmarked service door had been left open during routine work, and her curiosity led her inside. Before she realized how confusing the hidden corridors were, the maintenance panel had swung shut behind her. Her phone had lost signal beneath the steel decks, and every direction had looked exactly the same. She had followed the faint airflow hoping it would eventually lead someone to her, gently tapping against the metal walls whenever she thought footsteps passed nearby. Nathan quietly pieced together the final mystery. The ventilation system had carried Emily's unique scent throughout interconnected air ducts. Earlier that morning, Andrew Collins had placed his suitcase beside one of the service vents while waiting to board. Air flowing through the intake had briefly passed over the luggage before continuing through the ship. Rex had detected Emily's scent clinging faintly to the suitcase, but instead of believing the luggage itself was important, he had continued following the invisible trail back through the ventilation network toward its true source. The suitcase had never been suspicious. It had simply become part of a much larger path that only a trained nose could understand. The realization left everyone standing silently for several moments. One security officer shook his head with quiet amazement. "All this time, the dog was never pointing at the passenger," he said. "He was pointing through the passenger." Nathan smiled faintly. "Rex never follows assumptions," he replied. "He follows truth." As they slowly guided Emily back toward the main corridor, the atmosphere aboard the Liberty Star remained calm. Passengers above continued enjoying the voyage, completely unaware that an extraordinary search had just ended beneath their feet without panic, confusion, or disruption. The ship moved steadily across the Atlantic beneath a brightening afternoon sky, while sunlight filtered through portholes onto polished steel walls. Emily paused before climbing the final stairway and knelt carefully despite her exhaustion. She wrapped both hands around Rex's broad neck, resting her forehead gently against his warm fur. Rex remained perfectly still, accepting the embrace with the quiet dignity that had defined him since the beginning of the journey. Nathan watched the moment without speaking. Some victories did not require applause. They simply required someone willing to trust the one voice that had been telling the truth from the very beginning. By early afternoon, the atmosphere aboard the Liberty Star had settled back into its familiar rhythm, yet something invisible had changed. Word spread quietly among the captain, the senior crew, and the security team, not as gossip, but as quiet gratitude. They understood how close an ordinary misunderstanding had come to leaving someone alone inside a forgotten corner of the ship for far longer than anyone wished to imagine. Emily Parker sat comfortably inside the ship's medical office, wrapped in a fresh blanket with a warm cup of tea resting between her hands. Color had slowly returned to her face, and the tension that had clouded her blue eyes earlier that morning had begun to melt away. The ship's nurse confirmed that she was healthy, only tired, mildly dehydrated, and shaken by the unexpected ordeal. Nathan stopped by the medical office before returning to his regular patrol. Emily looked up as Rex entered first, his nails clicking softly across the polished floor. A genuine smile spread across her face, brighter than any expression she had worn since being found. "I still cannot believe he knew where I was," she said quietly. Nathan leaned against the doorway with his familiar calm expression. "Rex did not know everything," he replied. "He only trusted what his nose kept telling him. The difficult part was trusting him back." Emily reached down and gently scratched behind Rex's ears. The German shepherd closed his eyes for a brief moment, accepting the affection with quiet contentment before sitting faithfully beside Nathan once more. "People kept searching for the wrong answer," Emily whispered. "But he never did." Nathan nodded. "That is why he is my partner." Later that afternoon, the captain invited Nathan to the bridge. Large windows stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing endless blue water sparkling beneath the afternoon sun. Seabirds drifted effortlessly alongside the ferry, while distant fishing boats appeared as tiny white shapes against the horizon. Captain Richard Lawson, a white man in his early 60s with neatly trimmed silver hair and decades of quiet authority in his voice, extended his hand warmly. "Officer Hayes," he said, "I have commanded ships for almost 30 years. Today reminded me that experience alone is never enough. Sometimes the smallest clue deserves the greatest attention." Nathan accepted the handshake with humble gratitude. "My partner deserves the credit, Captain." The captain smiled toward Rex, who sat patiently near the chart table without moving an inch. "Then please thank him for every person aboard this vessel. He reminded all of us that paying attention can be an act of kindness." Before leaving the bridge, Nathan glanced through the wide windows once more. The Atlantic stretched endlessly beneath scattered clouds, peaceful and unchanged despite everything that had unfolded beneath the decks only hours earlier. It struck him that most of the passengers would complete their journey without ever realizing how close they had come to passing by someone who needed help. Perhaps that was not a bad thing. Sometimes the greatest success belonged to the emergencies that ended quietly before fear ever had the chance to spread. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, Andrew Collins found Nathan walking along the open promenade deck with Rex at his side. The businessman carried the same Navy suitcase that had unknowingly become the first piece of an invisible trail. He smiled sheepishly before extending his hand. "I owe your partner an apology," he admitted. "This morning I thought he had made a mistake." Nathan shook his hand warmly. Rex never took it personally. Andrew knelt beside the German shepherd and gently rested one hand against his shoulder. "Thank you for proving that appearances are not always the whole story." Rex responded with a slow wag of his tail before looking back toward the endless horizon where the sea met the fading sky, as though the remarkable events of the day had been nothing more than another quiet duty faithfully completed. The sun slipped lower across the Atlantic, covering the water with long ribbons of amber light that shimmered behind the Liberty Star as she continued north through calm evening seas. The cool breeze carried the familiar scent of salt and fresh air across the upper deck, washing away the quiet tension that had settled over the ship earlier that day. Passengers gathered along the railings with cameras in their hands. Children laughed as gulls glided effortlessly beside the ferry, and somewhere nearby a violinist softly played an old American folk melody that drifted through the evening air like a gentle prayer. Nathan Hayes rested both forearms against the polished railing while Rex sat faithfully beside him, watching the horizon with the same steady attention he had given every moment of the voyage. Neither of them needed words. They had shared too many long days together for silence to feel empty. After several minutes, footsteps approached from behind. Nathan turned to find Emily Parker walking toward them, her strength fully returned and her expression brighter than it had been all day. She carried a small paper gift bag with both hands. "I was hoping I could thank your partner properly before we reach port," she said with a warm smile. Nathan nodded gently. "I think he would like that." Emily knelt beside Rex and carefully removed a brand new blue tennis ball from the bag. Rex tilted his head with quiet curiosity as she offered it to him. He accepted it gently between his teeth without crushing it, then looked up at her with calm amber eyes that reflected the fading sunlight. Emily laughed softly, a sound that carried none of the fear she had felt only hours before. "You probably do not remember me," she whispered, gently resting one hand against his neck. "But I will remember you for the rest of my life." Nathan watched the simple moment unfold without interrupting it. During his years in uniform, he had witnessed medals awarded, ceremonies performed, and speeches delivered beneath countless American flags. Yet none of those memories felt quite as meaningful as watching one grateful stranger smile because a faithful dog had refused to ignore something invisible. As the ferry slowly approached the distant shoreline, Captain Richard Lawson's voice came across the public address system, welcoming passengers and thanking them for traveling aboard the Liberty Star. His announcement remained ordinary until the final sentence. "Before we arrive, I would also like to recognize one member of today's voyage whose extraordinary instincts quietly helped a fellow passenger return safely to her family. Sometimes the greatest service happens without applause, but today I believe one very good dog deserves both our gratitude and our respect." A wave of gentle applause spread naturally across the observation deck as curious passengers smiled toward Rex without fully knowing the entire story. The German shepherd simply looked around with mild confusion before returning his attention to the blue tennis ball resting between his paws. Nathan smiled to himself. Rex had never worked for recognition. He had worked because someone might need him. The ferry's horn sounded once, deep and reassuring, as the harbor slowly came into view beneath the golden evening sky. Nathan reached down and rested one weathered hand against Rex's broad shoulder. The dog leaned gently into the touch for only a moment before lifting his eyes toward the horizon once again. Nathan followed his gaze, watching the last light of day settle across the water. In a world filled with hurried voices, endless assumptions, and distractions that pulled people in every direction, one quiet bark had reminded everyone aboard that truth does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it waits patiently inside the smallest clue, trusting that someone will care enough to listen. And on that peaceful evening at sea, as the Liberty Star carried every soul safely toward home, Nathan realized that faith is often nothing more complicated than believing the loyal heart walking faithfully beside you.